assessment and trying to identify challenges, pitfalls, where we can even do better as a nation. The good thing is I'm also part of the discussions that Mr. Folorunsho has alluded to during his speech. I've been fortunate to be part of those discussions in the Finance Act, and I would give myself a pat on the back as well, and every other person in the team, that we have done a very good job. We're pushing consistency, in the production of the Finance Act. Prior to now, as you can tell, and this is like 10 years or even more ago, we didn't have anything that was any system for actively amending the laws. And so what had happened over time is we have accumulated a whole lot of gray tax areas that obviously would increase the incidence of litigation. But we're fortunate in Nigeria that we're not a litigious set. When you go to clients like the Americas, you find that every single thing goes to test in the court of law. So maybe we've been fortunate to get away with that. But I think now a lot of people are rising to the test to say, look, we have to push back. And the Tax Appeal Tribunal has been very, very instrumental to put in some order in what we expect there. Now, when we look at what has gone right in the Finance Act, I think Mr. Folorunsho and Alhaji Olatoye, my boss as well, has contributed. They've both contributed very well to what has gone right. And I wouldn't belabor some of those points, so I wouldn't really pick out those acts. But I'd like to stay true to the theme of this week as well, because I know we're talking about sustainable tax, is it tax revenues? Achieving sustainable development through taxation. And that, I think, is going to be one of my biggest questions or review points from the Finance Acts that we have produced over time. The big question is, what's the impact on the common man in our country? Whilst we're doing all of these Finance Acts, and some of us are very intellectual, we like the sound of all these section. But truth be told, at the end of the day, the real impact has to be felt by the population that we're serving. And so at every single point in time, we must take a step back and ask ourselves, measure what we have actually contributed in terms of the macroeconomic indices that we're facing, in terms of also the diversification of our economy as we would expect. One of the pitfalls that we have in Nigeria is that most of our revenues are largely inclined to the oil and gas sector, that's forex. And so very easily we get to feel the global shocks when there is either a rise in oil price or there is a dip in oil price. And so it's very important and pertinent that we diversify the economy. It's not like the economy isn't diversified, as you can tell from the GDP figures. It's just we have a largely informal sector. And because we have a largely informal sector, this is like the gray, black hole as well. So all of these markets that you see, those who are, performing economic activities, they also contribute to our GDP. But how well does the contribution that they make in form of taxes get back to the central coffers or to the coffers of the government? This is really the biggest issue that we have. Now, when you tie that back with the Finance Act and all of the players that are trying to make this better, I think there is an unwholesome focus on the Federal Internal Revenue Service to contribute to that process. But then we are looking away from the State Internal Revenue Service, who should be bigger players as well in that discussion. One of the critical acts that pulls all of these players together is the Personal Income Tax Act. And that Personal Income Tax Act is the one that will now tax some of these individuals and unincorporated organizations that we have playing in the informal sector. So it's very, very important that if we're going to strike a balance where we have an economy that is future-proof, where we have revenues that are future-proof, where we don't have that shock that we always receive when there is an increase in oil price, we must pull that informal sector into the bigger space. We must pull all the stakeholders as well into this discussion. Look into also the Personal Income Tax Act for amendments that have to be made there. And I'll give examples of some of those suggested amendments. We also need to look at the mode of collection of these taxes as well.
Revenue services needs to be actively involved as well in making decisions regarding the Finance Act. That's the one thing that I would say. The other thing that I do find is we speak a lot about sustainability, but we probably don't appreciate what needs to go into sustainable revenue generation. I'm also very glad that ESG has come on board, right? And Nigeria has taken significant efforts and made promises about getting to net zero by 2060. But that's only one part of the story in ESG. Getting to net zero focuses on the environmental adjustments that are required so that the GHG emissions that we emit reduces and we don't continue to cause global warming in our society. But then there are other things in the E, the S, and the G. So the E is environmental, S is social, and G is governance. Social is actually what a lot of developing economies need to focus on. That is bringing the most of our population out of poverty into well-enriched areas. When we look at the population in Nigeria, the spread is about 110 million people of ours is sitting below the poverty line. Above that poverty line, you have a mix of middle income class and the rich. Now remember again where I started from, the informal sector. The payers in the informal sector are largely the individuals and the unincorporated companies. Of course, there are some companies there that are making, monies, but maybe not paying taxes on them. And so when we start to look at who should be responsible for driving this, there has to be a collective effort. It shouldn't just be the FRS, it should also include other agencies where we're speaking based on real business issues and only talking tax once we've understood the business issues. A good example I would give is when we did the amendment to the VAT modification order. This is not through the Finance Act. There was an exclusion of certain oil and gas products from there. More specifically, AGO was excluded from the list of items that could have been VAT exempt. Whereas when you read the totality of the instrument, it would appear that it is exempt. It's just it wasn't specifically mentioned. And so that's causing a lot of argument already in the tax space. Now when you ask yourself, is there merit in doing or taking a position like that, especially looking at the issues that we're facing with subsidy and the fact that we don't have, or we continue to have subsidies on PMS. Is PMS of higher ranking than AGO? AGO is the basic product that is required for manufacturing. It's the basic product of fuel that most of the guys who are in that 110 million bracket would rely on, because at the end of the day, that's what sustains, for instance, the bread that we eat. Just look at the significant upward price that we had in bread, and some bakeries even closed because of that. Now, the ripple effect is that we continue to diminish the economical value that we can get where we're not doing things holistically and looking at business before tax. When the businesses die, taxes will no longer live. And so the organizations behind the businesses, the stakeholders that regulate that space, the stakeholders that also regulate the tax must come together if we're going to make any significant impact on the larger populace. We can't work in isolation. And that, I think, is one of the fundamental things that needs to change with the Finance Act. When it comes to stakeholder engagement, we must give time. We must understand the issues that the industries are facing. We must look at the impact on the prices that will come through after these proposals. And we must start to measure impact based on every Finance Act that comes through. And again, I'm not criticizing everything. I'm part of that process, like I disclosed before. I'm not saying everything there is bad. I'm just saying, can we be better? And yes, we can be better. We're the biggest nation in Africa. We hold ourselves to higher standards, and we can do things just as any other developed economy can do. And so some of these suggestions really are just in the best interest of our nation, and saying we always must look back to say, where is our real issue as a country?
Are we addressing the real issue? Are we supposed to do more? Yes, some of the provisions that we have amended, yes, it's just a drop in the bucket. But there's a lot more that we can do to start to align monetary policy with fiscal policies. There's a lot we can do as well to start to bring people to be more accountable for the taxes that they remit, where we have strong collaboration with the state tax authorities and the federal tax authorities. In fact, ideally, we should just have one single tax authority. But you know how that will go, because all of these agencies, people have maybe their own personal interest, and they're not looking at national interest above personal interest. But if we start to think of these things differently, and if we have more of you as well on board in these discussions, I think the story will change. So my plea is really around, we must look at the confines of ESG, the dictates of ESG. Nigeria has big ambitions to get to this by 2060. There are different elements apart from environmental. And one key example I'll just give that we can also look at is, whilst we say we are ESG friendly, we have left coal, for instance, as an exempt industry in Iditra, whereas we have taxed gas, which is supposed to be a transition fuel, going into the ESG space, so the green space. So I leave on that note because I see that it's time. Thank you for your time.
We run a kind of list when you give microphone to your everyday scholar and those that are taught for living. Please, let's appreciate all of them. By my time, we are supposed to leave this session by 1:15 or thereabouts. I'm not going to stay with that time. Yes, I know we have someone online. That's why I'm actually doing so. Okay, so I see another one or two comments that will come from this space. And quickly, I want to call on Mr. Agbeyi, right? No. Mr. Olale, yes, I know what I'm saying. So,